Welcome to the Springboard, a new podcast from Women & Co. by Pathfinder that hosts intergenerational conversations between women leaders and founders actively working to transform the systems that don't work for women. On this first episode, we have Kate Roberts, founder of Body Agency Collective and host of the podcast Sex, Body, and Soul. Kate has spent 30 years championing women's leadership, health, and wellness. We also have Suha Lalani, founder of PinkDetect, the first AI-powered breast health for women in Pakistan. Suha was recently named the Inc. magazine's Female Founders 500 list.
So thank you, Kate and Suha, for being on the very first episode of the Springboard, which is born out of Pathfinder's Women & Co. initiative, where we are bringing innovation and women at the center of everything that we do. My name is Madiha, and I'm the Vice President, Strategic Engagement and Innovation for Pathfinder International. I have been honored to be with this organization for over 6 years, and we have been working alongside communities in across more than 100 countries over the past 70 years. Our work centers on the intersections of health, climate, and women agency. And a little bit about the Springboard, since this is the first conversation. The Springboard is meant to host intergenerational conversations between women leaders such as yourself that are actively working to transform the systems that don't work for women. And with me on this journey today, you, Kate, and you, Suha, I am so humbled to be here next to you, well, virtually next to you, and having this conversation with the two of you. Kate, you are someone who has spent 30 years championing women's leadership, health, and wellness. You've advised organizations, built movements, and most recently founded the Body Agency Collective, a company making it easier for women to access health products and services they need to thrive. Soha, you are on a mission to end preventable breast cancer deaths in Pakistan, founding Detect, the country's first AI-powered breast health app that closes the gap between awareness and early detection. And your background in biomedical sciences makes you absolutely apt to do so. If I may, I have also been named to INC Magazine's Female Founders 500 list for 2026. So congratulations for that. So welcome to the two of you. And as we move, first, I'd love to hear from you, Kate. Who is Kate Roberts and what inspires you to do what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of Pathfinder. I have followed your work for many, many years. Such an honor to be on your first podcast. So thank you for having me. I actually started traveling around the world when I was 4 years old. My father was a sea captain. So I literally went to the 5 corners of the earth, and I started to notice at a very early age the disparities of girls and women. Being also a survivor myself of sexual abuse, I really knew at a very early age that I wanted to really focus on filling gaps and recognizing opportunities for girls and women's empowerment and also health. So I'm also a huge believer that art and narrative and telling stories is a way to paint the picture of what really is going on around the world in a way that gives people the agency to get involved and make a difference. So that's really why I got involved in this work. And over the last 30 years, I've been inventing organizations, starting organizations, companies, looking at opportunities of how to move the needle on these big issues that we're facing surrounding girls and women.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for that powerful imagery as well, because Pathfinder as an organization, we've always tried to use art, literature, and music to connect with the people in our communities. And that really resonated hard with me because it is one place I think we connect across borders, irrespective of who we are, what language you speak, because, it's universal. So Suha, who are you, and what inspires you to do your work?
Of course. Thank you for having me, first off. For me, it started with something very personal, just like Kate, right? I lost someone really close to me to late stage breast cancer. And what made it even harder to process at the time was the fact that I come from a relatively privileged background. So if late detection and breast cancer mortality is something that could hit our family with enough access and awareness, I just couldn't stop thinking about what that must look like for countless other women in Pakistan that do not have the same amount of resources or even a fraction of the resources that we did. And that's really when it just shifted for me and felt more like a systemic failure as opposed to an isolated tragedy. And I think that realization and the need to do something about it just deepened over time. So back in 2019, which for some reason now feels like a lifetime ago, I was doing my bachelor's in biomedical sciences in Canada and really looking at breast cancer disparities up close, especially for women of color. And I started to notice the same patterns globally, right? That we have the tools, we have the knowledge for early detection, and we have a lot of tools for a lot of cancers, actually. It's just that they're not reaching the women who need them the most. And so PinkDetect really just came out of that tension, like that frustration of seeing a problem that's actually solvable and the belief that we could build something that meets women just where they are. And I think over the years, what's really evolved since then is how I personally define impact. I remember when I started off, I was really focused on early detection and the numbers. But now I think a lot more about agency as well. Like, how do we give women not just that information, but the confidence and access to act on that very information that we're delivering? So really, it's just gone from building a tool to really now trying to shift how women experience and navigate healthcare altogether.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And when you said 2019, the first thing that popped into my head was actually COVID. And 2019 and 2020 sort of redefined what health and what the world looked like for so many of us. And I think one of
Mm.
the also bigger reasons was that I was a new mom. I had just had my son had just turned 2 in 2019, and I just started a new job, actually at Pathfinder, funny enough. And 3.5 months or 4 months later into my role, which started in November, and then March 2020, COVID shut us down completely. And the world, I think, at least, has never looked the same since then.
Mm.
And what we saw in COVID too was actually the disproportionate impact that it had on women and girls. It had on gender-based violence, it had on access to health services. It was also the emotional labor, the physical labor that increased for women during that time. So anytime there's a shock, or anytime even in its current existence, somehow seems to disproportionately and negatively impact women and girls. And maybe, Kate, you could share something from your travels. What did you see as, issues that women face, and what do you see as one of the barriers or obstacles for women as they enter into even entrepreneurship or becoming founders or leaders?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we all share something in common because I started the body agency during COVID as well. And I would say from my travels, and I think I'm up to about 120 countries now, it doesn't matter where I go, girls are just not valued. And it's as simple as that. There are so many deep-seated cultural norms that exist around how we treat women, what we offer women, girls going to school, being able to go to school and stay in school, girls having access to contraception and family planning, girls having access to healthcare, such as the work that Suha is doing. So I'm thrilled to hear about what you're doing because we need systems, right? We need systems to deliver the healthcare and to feed the needs of girls and women around the world. And, when you just learn about the sheer numbers, 1 in 4 girls suffer with some form of sexual violence. Hundreds of millions of women do not have access to sexual reproductive health care. So for me, it's just a no-brainer. I remember understanding what's happening in Papua New Guinea, a country that most people have just not heard about. 90% of girls and women there suffer abuse in the home. 90%. 90%. In fact, from my understanding, if you're not abused as a woman, you actually think there's something wrong with you because it's so culturally normal. So we have to really start there, right? With, okay, why are girls not valued? What are the solutions? And I believe that one of the biggest solutions is bringing men in as advocates and bringing men's voices in as and funding, by the way, which I know we're going to talk about with our challenges. But yeah, I think that men can be a big part of the solution here.
Thank you. And that resonates with me very deeply too. Our work across the world has shown us that it's irrespective of where we go, which country we're sitting in, what community we're sitting in. There are just multiple layers of issues that are so similar that they're almost like a pattern across the world that we see. They manifest differently, but at the end of the day, I hear you when you say that, especially in today's time where women and girl sexual and reproductive rights, access to services is backsliding through political changes, policy changes, geopolitical norms, and even conflict. So I'd love to hear what there's something that resonates with you or something maybe different that you may have seen in your journey.
No, for sure. Everything here resonates. And over the years, I believe that having seen these barriers and gaps individually, I've now started to think of them as interconnected gaps in how systems are just designed around women's lives, like Kate mentioned. Like in my own experience, one of the most immediate gap that I've noticed is awareness. But simply not in terms of information. It's more so about whether women can access the information in ways that feel safe to them, that feel private to them, or that feel even culturally acceptable. Because in many regions, especially in Pakistan, even beginning that conversation around breast health can be very difficult. Even using the word breast is very hard, right? Which means that the decision to seek care is delayed even before it begins. That awareness then very much connects to access. So even when awareness is there, the pathways to screening are often so fragmented or costly or just physically out of reach for so many women in Pakistan. And what we're really trying to do with PinkDetect is to create a more of a holistic experience, one that essentially guides women from initial self-assessment through to trusted care in a way that is practical and responsive to their own cultural or the realities of their own communities. And actually, when you look at awareness and access together from a macroscopic lens, the most fundamental barrier is, again, agency, right? Too often, health systems are positioning women as passive beneficiaries rather than active participants, that just what Kate talked about, right? Even in their own care. And so a central part is about shifting that whole relationship, ensuring that women are informed, but while they're informed, they're also able to act with confidence and autonomy.
Mhm. So I love what you're doing because essentially we need to make healthcare accessible, affordable, and desirable. So people need to understand why they need your services, but they also need to be able to afford it and they need to be aware of it. And the use also of technology, I think, is key because now absolutely everybody has access to a smartphone. Even if they don't own one themselves in the village, they will have access to at least one. I also think that today, what we really need is innovation, but it needs to be simple enough for people to be able to understand it and for it to be implemented. And I think by implementing and trying out various technologies like this, we can then scale it simply. You know, working on these issues for almost 30 years now, I've really seen the evolution of learning from different pandemics like COVID, like HIV/AIDS, and taking those learnings and then applying them to different issues like breast cancer, like gender-based violence and access to contraception, and then scaling it. And with AI today, we absolutely have that capability of cutting down the need for workforce and applying that innovation. So congratulations on everything you've done, Suha. It's pretty amazing.
I'm grateful for people like Soha to think through simple solutions, but that can be really life changing and impact driven. And as you were talking, one of the things that I heard was that agency is not just, limited to access and information, but also being able to make the decisions to use that or uptake that service with the understanding, or at least putting yourself at the center of the conversation. And something that we are doing at Pathfinder now is we're working across our different communities to actually shift how we build solutions. So Women in Co by Pathfinder is an incubation platform and an innovation platform that works and recenters women not as passive beneficiaries, but rather as active co-creators and co-designers for the solutions that they identify in terms of the problems that they may be facing, and then building solutions to overcome those. But I wanted to center the conversation to both of you amazing people and leaders. So maybe we'll start with you, Suhad, this time, just to shift things around. But I'd love to hear from a personal reflection some of the challenges that you as a leader faced while you were leading development of an AI powered app that focuses on early detection of breast cancer in a space where you've already very clearly mentioned was stigmatized. I'm from Pakistan as well. And I remember many, many years ago, I used to work for an NGO that worked on censorship. And funny enough, we found out that the word breast was censored in Pakistan to an extent that you couldn't even research breast cancer for a really long time. And I always wondered for medical students what that meant because it was such an important part of our medical landscape, where breast cancer is one of the leading cancers in Pakistan. So, what were some of the challenges you faced, and maybe some inspiration on how you overcame those?
Actually, I'd like to share a fun fact. When I was traveling for my app pilots in some of the most remote villages across Pakistan, I realized that a lot of the regional languages like Tatki, they don't even have a word for breast in their native languages. So it's censored to that extent. But I think one of the hardest parts early on was realizing that building a solution is very different from building something that is actually going to work in people's lives, especially when we're talking about Pakistani women. So I remember spending time in interior Sindh, which is a fairly remote part in Pakistan, where we were trying to understand how women engage with breast health, right? And on paper, a lot of our assumptions made sense, like using a digital tool to guide women towards early detection. But in reality, when we were actually there, we just saw how many layers there were, like limited connectivity, low digital literacy, varying health literacy, and more importantly, just deep cultural hesitations around even talking about breast health. Like I remember women would just look down. They wouldn't even make eye contact when we would be talking about breast health or like, just collecting enough data for our proposed solution. And that in itself was a very humbling moment because it kind of forced us to take a lot of steps back and just confront the gap between what we thought would work and what women actually needed. And we had to completely rethink our product and the entire approach, like how we're designing, how are we communicating, and like you said, who are we involving in the process? Are we actually involving the communities as co-creators or not? And I wish I had known this earlier, and somebody had actually told me that progress in this kind of work is never linear. You don't just go from an idea to an impact in a straight line, right? There's going to be a lot of setbacks and moments where you have to completely rethink your assumptions, and that's the beauty of it too, right?
It truly is. And I really appreciated the part where you talked about shifts that you may have needed to make. And I wonder, as you were building out the solution, were there any personal challenges that you faced at your end? Not necessarily just in the app, but maybe convincing people or finding funding to do this work, or Really just situating yourself in a founder landscape, which is predominantly men.
Oh, for sure. I think even when you go into these funding rooms where there's a lot of funders or predominantly men, one of the biggest things that they miss, especially from a Silicon Valley lens, actually, is how different women's realities actually are across continents, right? And how much that should shape what we build. So there was frequently an assumption that access to tech is going to automatically translate into, care and empowerment. But from where I'm sitting, that's just not the case. So you can have the best smartphone in your phone and the fastest internet connection and still face barriers like taboo, stigma, lack of trust in the entire system, financial friction, to name a few, and also the uncertainty about whether it is safe to act on the information you're seeing. I remember when we were doing our focus groups in Hyderabad, India, actually, one of the women there told us that, she's noticed a lump for the past few months, but she's afraid to tell her husband because if she does, she's afraid that her husband is going to divorce her or he just might go and get another wife. And so these are the real challenges that we had to face. And these are very different problems to solve altogether. And the real opportunity is to build context aware solutions, right? Solutions that are going to prioritize privacy and are designed particularly for low trust environments and that guide women to information as well as like clear actionable steps. A lot of people miss that some of the most valuable insights are coming from women who are very much navigating these challenges every single day because they understand the trade-offs, the nuances, and the realities in a way that these fancy product teams or environments cannot truly be captured.
I have so many thoughts on this.
Please, I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Differently, maybe even 10 years ago, and hearing from a young entrepreneur today.
So I've battled the manosphere for a very long time. And I actually remember one time when I got a big promotion, a job that I had doing this work. And one of my colleagues, a man, wandered into my office and said, Kate, and this is how it was delivered, it's great that you got this promotion, but ultimately you should just invest in some time in having some drinks with the guys. And so that is to say, this is the world we live in, right? It's still the world we live in. And as a woman founder and a woman leader, I've had to work harder. It's just as simple as that. I have. One thing I will say is only 3% of women founders get funded. It is especially difficult when you are dealing with issues that are affecting women's bodies. So women have an agency over their own bodies is extremely important. But when you're a founder and when you're dealing with stigma-related issues, why female cancer is a stigma-related issue, I still don't understand it to this day. But when I was starting the body agency, we were talking about issues of menopause, sexual wellness, libido, sexual pleasure. And you go into a boardroom and you're talking to male funders about this, you can literally see them glazing over. Saying this, over 50% of my investors are men. And the way that you reach them is by the dollars and cents and the opportunity for investment on these issues. Social media today rules the world. It's as simple as that. It rules the world. It's how we're telling stories. It's how we're selling products. It's how we're reaching people with solutions and innovation. However, Meta bans certain words that you can't use when you're pulling together an Instagram or a Facebook spot. So you can't really use the word vagina or, it will just get blurred out, which is maddening. So we have to engage men in the solution, and there needs to be an education that goes along with that. And then you will get male advocates, the money will flow, and we'll ultimately end up finding solutions in partisan with men. The second thing that I think is a real opportunity for us to move the needle on these issues is identifying young female leaders like Suha that are really bringing culturally relevant solutions to the table. And so at the Body Agency Collective, we're actually looking to empower these ideas. We're always looking for the best solutions and then bringing in leaders to really help them to develop their brand, develop the solution, and then implement it in country. And that needs basic business skills. Like we need to teach to our next generation of leaders the basics. How do you fundraise? How do you brand? How do you pull the narrative together? How are you communicating? Because a lot of these brilliant ideas are nestled in Pakistan or Botswana or, across developing countries. So I'm just a huge believer in young entrepreneurs with great ideas that need to be empowered.
So, anything you want to, add at this point? Because I think there's a lot that Kate just said, talked about young entrepreneurship and leadership, and maybe, using this moment to kind of build in your experience and maybe some form of inspiration for others that might be looking to you as a, role model or a source of inspiration, you as yourself.
I don't know about that. Whether people look at me as inspiration, I'm sure that men in these boardrooms and these funding rooms certainly do not. But I think that over these years, and if there's one advice that I have for the younger generation of entrepreneurs, it would be that bring the voices of the communities that you're working for into your UI UX processes and bring them as co-creators, something that Pathfinder is doing, because you essentially want to fundamentally change what's getting built in the first place. And you can only do so once you're actually bringing those women and communities in that co-creation process. And I know a lot of funders would disagree with me because they want profits, they want the numbers, real quick. But that's not how it works, especially when you're working in these communities. There's a lot of pre-work that needs to be done. And, there's a lot of awareness that needs to be created before you even deploy that solution. So my only advice would be to bring those very voices into the UI UX processes, because they've gone unheard for so many years and decades that we need to now finally start getting them into this whole process to ensure that there is a bigger impact and there's more of a ripple effect, if I may.
Kate, one of the things that Suha mentioned that sort of clicked to me that maybe we could go a little deeper into is both you and Suha mentioned, how sometimes it glazes over when you talk about women's health or women's bodies. Have you seen the conversation shift on women's bodies? Have you truly seen maybe people trying to talk about it with more courage or being more bold?
Yeah. So, again, over the years, there's been huge progression in that regard. We've also seen the big movements that have started, such as Time's Up and various movements that we've had, marches, and we've also had and various different things that have limited access to healthcare and sexual reproductive health. I would say that women's bodies are literally a no-go zone for men to talk about. I think there is fear, and there's also lack of understanding and education, and they just don't see it relevant to them unless you actually work in healthcare. So men are fathers. They are husbands, they are sons, they are grandsons, they are birthed from women's bodies. Like, we give men and boys life. And I think it's never been a focus for us to educate men on what happens to women's bodies. There are myths, awful practices that go on in the world. In Nepal, for instance, when a girl gets her period, she's often locked in the cowshed because she's considered dirty. And when she gives birth, she's bleeding, considered dirty. She's not allowed to be around men, so she's locked in the cowshed. These are some of the cultural practices that are still prominent around the world. Girls aren't even allowed to be born in India, as you know. Girls are killed at birth often. I get back to my statement of girls are just not valued. So with our bodies, it's an uphill battle. Again, I like to look at the solutions. of how we are going to start to move the needle. We know what the issues are. And with menopause, for instance, it needs to be talked about in an economic way, as in when women reach menopause, they are going to be less productive in the workforce. So companies should be empowering women to stay in the workforce during menopause. Again, if a woman gets sick or if a woman has been experiencing gender-based violence in the home, it affects the whole family. So again, it's education, it's bringing men in, it's teaching them about how women's bodies work so they are less afraid, they have an understanding. And they know the economic return that we will have investing in our bodies, investing in keeping us strong, healthy, good mothers, good workers, and that will then be passed down to the next generation. It is the girl effect. If you give a woman $10 anywhere in the world, she will invest it into her family. She will buy her daughter books so she can study. She will start a business. If you give a man $10, he might invest it in having a beer with the boys or on other activities. I mean, I'm not trying to make that mainstream, but it's a proven fact that that's what actually happens. So again, we should be bringing men into the conversation, whether it's as a funder, as an advocate, as a good partner. And let's start there.
I wish it was different. I wish we didn't have to continue to build our argument around economics and economic returns when we talk about women and women's body and investing in health and well-being. But you're right, these are the unfortunate realities, I think, sometimes that we're faced with, that we need to commodify it in some ways in order for it to make sense.
I really want to make this point that the world has global charities, NGOs, corporations, global social entrepreneurs like Suha. We know that aid has been cut by the US government. It's having a huge impact on the NGO community. We have to focus on private sector solutions to both invest in sustainable solutions and innovation, but also to bring in private sector thinking, bring in private sector leaders, because this now, in the time that we are in, will be our solution. Again, we know what the problems are. We know what the barriers and the challenges are that we've all been experiencing over the last 3 decades. And I believe a lot of these solutions do sit in Silicon Valley. They do sit in, the CEO of Coca-Cola or the CEO of Unilever, and we have to bring them into the equation, as well as government leaders, because again, that's where the power is, right? Public-private partnerships.
And the CEO that is Soha, Lalani as well, because Soha is bringing those solutions to the forefront. We all have to come together on the same page. It's just, how do we get all of us on the same page is really the big elephant in the room. Because we've all been saying the same thing. We've been talking, like you said, for 3 decades about the barriers that we have. Today, I'm sitting here talking to you, Kate, and you, Suha. There's so much similarities between your experiences, irrespective of the generational differences. So when do we get on the same page? How do we get on the same page? And I think maybe we start by having deeper conversations with those in our ecosystem that may think differently, that may see things from a different lens and still want the same thing for all of us, right? And one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation was to point out that despite the years that have been invested in by academia, by NGOs, by innovators and solution seekers, we are still standing here in 2026 saying there is a backsliding on the progress on sexual and reproductive health. And that is unacceptable. Like, that's just non-negotiable at this point. So how do we keep going? How do we keep building each other up in order to support each other and also to bring that collective voice and action to the forefront? So I wanna maybe just ask something that might make you pause for a bit. So take your time if you want to think about it. But I want to ask, what do you think is the opportunity? Where are some of the critical opportunities for women that you actually think can reshape the world?
Well, I think you've already said it. I really believe that this has to be collective action, whether it be between women or men or both. And using our voices, using our business acumen, and also sharing failures, I think is really, really important. As founders, also have some form of an ego, right? We think that we've got the best solution. I would also say that look at the landscape before you go out and start something. Partner up with great existing organizations like Pathfinder as an infrastructure. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. I also founded Maverick Collective. I saw the power of women coming together as funders and advocates, using their time, talent, and treasure to move the needle and provide money to innovate around solutions. So for me, it is not trying to do it all yourself. Form partnerships, do what you're best at, and then build partnerships around the rest.
Yeah, just to add on to what Kate said, and we've talked about this, but also bringing men as allies is so important, even if they're not coming in as funders. Like in a lot of communities that I work with, women do not have the agency to take decisions about their own bodies, right? So we need to bring men in and educate them just as much so that they understand the importance of sexual and reproductive health, about women's health and women's agency, and they can create that triple effect and that omni-channel impact.
I have a recommendation for somebody to have on your podcast. Actually, her name is Nisha Pahuja, and she's actually a filmmaker, and she made an Oscar-nominated film called To Kill a Tiger, and it's all about a family in rural India. The 13-year-old daughter was gang raped at 13, if you can imagine, and her father stepped forward against all the community, basically saying that this young girl should marry one of her perpetrators, and he sought justice for his daughter. So it just goes to show the power that men have and how they can use it to create change around the world. And I happen to know she's also making another film called Send Us Your Brother. And again, it is about Indian culture and how this whole notion of you just not valued as a girl. But again, I want to draft and create narrative that actually men can understand, rather than just try to blame them for all the problems that we have around our bodies, because that's not working.
That's true. I think the conversation needs to shift from, but, sort of bringing men in as participants also the conversation about sexual and reproductive health. One of the things we did many years ago and continue to do today is engage with men, not just, again, as passive beneficiaries in our programs, but also as active participants. But we've also been including conversations amongst men and women to create those power dynamic shifts amongst them so they can talk to each other about the realities within which they both exist and then also talk about the solutions to the problems that they both exist with. But I wanted to actually pull back on something you said, Kate, because that was really, to me, a really important point is that don't reinvent the wheel. A lot of the times we come across the understanding of innovation as being the first. And I heard that from another incredible woman leader. Her name is Efua in conversation. And she said, sometimes we're just rushing to be the first to do something, but sometimes we don't need to be the first. We just need to look at what's already been done, what's not working, and how do we help fix it. And I think that really resonated well with me. So I know who Kate wants to hear on the next podcast. But Soha, I'd love for you to give a shout out to somebody who inspires you, and then for you to also tell me who you might want to hear on the next podcast.
course, there's so many amazing women who I can think of, but on top of my head, Sameem Hashim, who's the Chief Operating Officer at the Brain and Mind Institute at Aga Khan University in East Africa. And she's amazing. She was my professor back when I was studying biomedical sciences. She taught us pharmacology, and in every conversation that we had throughout the course, she would try to center women's health equity and how women have or have not been a part of so many drug trials. And I think equity is something that is so important to her and really made me rethink about all the nuances and the assumptions that I had in the healthcare industry.
Thank you both of you so much for what I can only describe as a warming conversation in so many ways, because it brought me a lot of joy to hear from both of you, inspired me in so many different ways. But also, I think, and I hope will resonate with those that hear us, that the time now is to put aside our differences, to come together as a collective, and to come talk about the future that we would like to see built, which is one that shares resources, shares power, shares access, and looks at how we can center being human first before everything else. So thank you both. And what a wonderful way for me to end my time in Sydney. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.